Today we're going to talk about Parshas Re'eh. So Parshas Re'eh is very interesting because it has significant similarities, as do the other previous Parshios, with the events that occurred at Har Sinai, and is basically a restatement, a retestament of a number of those things. But the really interesting part about the retelling of this part of the Sinai covenant, or the bris at Har Sinai, is that the differences are actually very important that we have experienced from the previous parshios and are really being driven home in this parsha. So this week really restates the covenant that's made at Sinai, which is the one that's made at Parshas Mishpatim, which is that whole section over there. So we're going to take a look at the different sections, their similarities, and we're going to look at some of the differences. So in Mishpatim, we have laws that emphasize doing the right thing to others. So there's sense of justice, social justice. Okay, so what are we talking about? So you have, for example, if you look back in Mishpatim, which would be Shemos or Exodus, chapter 22 and 24, it's talking about lending money to the poor. And those type of things are echoed here in Devarim in 23:20. You shall also do lending, but here more specifically it talks about not using ribis. Okay, so the idea is that there's a context of doing things that are charitable. We'll come back to that in a second. Okay, other things that are mentioned in both brisos are that talking about a person who has been selling themselves into indentured servitude. So if you have what's known as an Eved Ivri, the indentured slave, so he stays for 6 years. Okay, so that's in chapter 21. It's in verse 2. And over here we repeat that, but we also mention that you have to send him away with something. Can't go away empty-handed. Again, talking about being a little more charitable. That's in chapter 15, verse 13. Okay, so in this parsha, we also see a restatement of all of the festivals. Okay, so it says that you're going to celebrate the festivals, right? The 3 Yomim Tovim are all mentioned in chapter 23 there. And over here, towards the end of this parsha as well, everyone is going to appear to perform all the festivals, okay? There's also a restatement of idolatry. Okay, so we say in Parshas Mishpatim, we talk about not doing idolatry, all right? And we restate that again in this parsha, again, that we restate them all again. So all these things are stated again, and also the kosher animals are repeated in both of these places. Are repeated in this place here, but it's not repeated in Mishpatim. So that's a little bit of a different thing. It's a similarity but a different thing. The focus on Mishpatim was also about the sacrificial service. So you talk about not using the blood there. We also talk over here about not consuming the blood when you're going throughout the land. It's a lot of similarities. The biggest differences are that in this parsha, this week's parsha, Parshas Re'eh, the focus is about we're going into the land of Israel. So it's different than Parshas Mishpatim. Parshas Mishpatim is the covenant at Sinai, which talks about direct relationship between what Hashem is doing with the Jewish people. So the biggest difference between Mishpatim and Re'eh is that towards ending the parsha in Parshas Mishpatim, there is a statement that Hashem makes to Moshe saying, I'm going to give you this malach, this angel, and he's going to lead your way through to the land, I should say. But Parshas Re'eh doesn't say that. Parshas Re'eh is talking about what you're doing when you get to the land. You're going to build a temple in the place that I choose. You're going to engage in things that are going to be unique to the land, and they're Shemitah, also again tons and tons of things that are unique to practicing in the land. Not that they're not in Parshas Mishpatim, but they are mentioned there. Again, you can look at all the similarities, but that's the big difference, is that in the covenant and the British at Har Sinai, there's a certain type of protection being offered as you go through there, and then there's a new restatement of the covenant here. The biggest difference here is Moshe Rabbeinu is restating the covenant, and so what you're really seeing is a contrast of two areas of the covenant. There's a covenant at Sinai, and there's a covenant at Aver HaYarden, which is Parshas Re'eh. And it's like a long, drawn-out covenantal process. So, in a sense, it's like if you're reading a long contract. The Torah, if you take away all the stories and look at it as a very long contract, it looks like this. I promised your forefathers that I would bring you here, all right? And so that's like the preamble to your contract, that I would bring you here. That's going to include some travel fees. It's going to require to have to subsidize your journey. That's one of those things. But in order for me to meet that aspect of it, to take you from Egypt to the land of Israel, you're going to have to follow all of these laws. So I will provide these, you will do these, I will take you there. So the question is, what happens in between those huge moments? The moment of Sinai and the moment of Aver HaYarden. So Sinai is like the culmination of what the Avos were doing. They were practicing Torah. They were learning about how to follow God's ways in this world. Well, Sinai was that moment where God actually said, instead of trying to guess what I want, this is what I want. And here it's laid out for you, specifically this way. Don't turn from, and then that's what we say in this Parsha, in this week's Parsha, don't veer from it left or right. So when we restate the Mishpatim covenant, the bris made there, that covenant is explicit. Follow these rules, and this angel will lead the way. So why restate it here in the whole Torah again? Because the nature of the relationship changes. Because the movement through the wilderness was totally miraculous, and we've been talking about this for weeks now in the Parshas. You got manna from heaven. I protected you from everything. Your clothes didn't wear out. All of your needs are taken care of. Just follow the route and follow the rules. And we see this the bumpy road as getting over there. We see that we need to ask for forgiveness, and the relationship should change. But as we see from the Haftarahs of Nachamusa, the idea is, and the feelings that we should be getting from this is that even though we have strayed from our agreement, we are not upholding our point of the covenant. God is still there saying, we had an agreement. You need to follow it. Why are you not following the agreement? We had a deal. Right? So we have to go ahead and live up to our side. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, so therefore we have to focus on that. So Re'eh is different than Mishpatim in the following way, which is that we don't have the same heavenly guidance that we had at Sinai. And that aspect is added into this week's Parsha. Because Moshe is saying, I'm done. This is it for me. But we've laid it out very clearly for you. So the one huge difference between Mishpatim and Re'eh is that while in Mishpatim there's divine guidance, God hands the reins over to the people and says, you're going to get human leadership. You're going to establish your own design for a temple. You're going to build a temple in the place of my choosing, right? The place that I choose to dwell, which is going to have some input. But the idea is that you're going to build up the society. I've given you the tools, right? I've given you all the tools for the great society. Now use that to show us what you can accomplish with it. So the biggest change is that you need to beware of those people who will lead you to idolatry. You know, those practices that will lead you to idolatry. I am giving you all that you need to live a wholesome moral life. So beware of the false prophet. I want you to have prophets. I'll tell you, this is how you find a good prophet. He's going to perform a sign or a wonder and speak in my name. If he tries to perform a sign and a wonder and speak in the name of an idol, put him to death. And if your brethren come to you and they say, we're going to go worship idols, put them to death too. A whole city starts doing it, put that place to death, right? Weed that all out. If you're trying to build the right society, you need to weed out the things that are going to detract you from keeping this connection. So the big step forward in Parshas Re'eh is recognizing that while Hashem is still actively involved, Hashem takes the seat of heavenly king. The king doesn't get involved in the day-to-day activities in the same way. The king doesn't send his own, Praetorian guard to get involved. He is delegating the societal part to the Jewish people. The Jewish people will take a king when they so choose, and they will set up courts, and they will set up places of judgment and run a just society. So the feeling we should get from Parshas Re'eh is a sense of a proud parent watching their child grow up and move out of the house. Because that's, in a sense, what's happening. Instead of God having to manage everything and handle everything and constantly be in charge of all of the house issues and be in charge of reproving everybody, this is now this is that big step forward, that big next step. And that I think that's a good mashal to have, is a sense of watching your child grow up and watching them step out into their big great society. So Parshas Re'eh gives us that feeling, that sense of God gives us the Torah and trusts us to build the world that He sees, but gives us the trust in Him that we trust in Him, and He trusts us to make the right decisions to do good things for everyone around us.